Your brain is not remembering the past. It is obeying it. Every hesitation you feel is an old command still running. Most people never realize they're being controlled by something that already ended. If you stay with this, your reactions will slow down. Your emotional leaks will close. Patterns that once owned you will lose their grip. You will become harder to predict and harder to manipulate. Your brain was never designed to elevate you. It was designed to keep you alive, and survival always favors caution over expansion. That is why emotional pain is encoded deeper than success, and why loss leaves sharper traces than victory. The mind treats threat as priority information. It does not ask whether the danger is over. It only asks whether it was intense enough to remember. Most people mistake this mechanism for wisdom. In reality, it is a protective reflex running long past its expiration date. What you call memory is often unfinished emotional processing. When an experience overwhelms your sense of control, the brain preserves it in high resolution. Tone, facial expressions, rejection, failure, humiliation, these are stored as reference points for future decisions. Without awareness, these references quietly become rules. You hesitate not because the present is dangerous, but because the past trained your nervous system to expect punishment. The brain obeys the strongest emotional imprint, not the most rational assessment. This is why the past feels authoritative. It arrives with emotional certainty, while the present feels uncertain and untested. The unaware mind confuses familiarity with truth. Old pain feels real because it is known. New opportunity feels risky because it is undefined. This imbalance causes people to protect old identities instead of building stronger ones. They become loyal to versions of themselves that were formed under pressure, not choice. Very few understand this distinction. Memory is data, not command. It only gains power when it is treated as instruction. Awareness breaks this hierarchy. When you observe a reaction without immediately acting on it, you interrupt the survival loop. The brain begins to relearn. It stops assuming that yesterday's threat still applies today. This is the beginning of control. Most people never reach this stage. They live inside reflex. The aware individual does something different. He notices the emotional surge, names it internally, and delays response. That delay weakens the memory's authority. Over time, the brain updates its model of reality. The past loses its grip not through force, but through quiet non-compliance. This is how protection transforms into power, and how survival instincts are repurposed into strategic awareness. Control emerges when repetition stops feeding fear and starts feeding clarity, because the brain adapts to rewards. When calm observation replaces urgency, neural pathways reorganize. Eventually, the mind stops guarding wounds and begins allocating energy toward precision and forward movement. Most people believe they are responding to the present, but their nervous system is operating on delayed signals. What feels like instinct is often residue. A tone of voice triggers an old humiliation. A pause feels like rejection. A challenge feels like threat. The body reacts before the mind has time to assess. This is not intuition. It is conditioning replaying itself with confidence. The brain does not differentiate between past and present when emotion is involved. Once a situation resembles a previous loss of control, the same internal alarms activate. Heart rate shifts, muscles tighten, perception narrows. The individual thinks he is being strategic, but he is only defending an old wound. This is why people over-explain, withdraw, over-assert, or freeze in moments that require clarity. They are protecting a memory, not engaging with reality. Unaware behavior is always louder. It rushes to justify itself. It seeks validation, control, or escape. This creates predictable patterns that others can read and exploit. Very few recognize that emotional reactivity is a signal of unresolved dominance loss. Somewhere in the past, control was taken. The system remembers, even if the conscious mind denies it. The reaction is an attempt to prevent the same outcome, regardless of whether the threat exists. Power begins with recognition. When you realize that the intensity of your reaction rarely matches the situation, you gain leverage. The present moment becomes quieter. The urge to respond immediately weakens. This is where dominance starts to return, not through force, but through restraint. Delay creates space. Space creates choice. Choice restores authority. Those who master this do not eliminate emotion. They contain it. They allow the surge to pass without expression. Silence becomes a filter. Observation replaces impulsive explanation. This confuses those who rely on predictable emotional responses to gain advantage. The aware individual becomes difficult to provoke because his reactions are no longer tied to past outcomes. Most people remain trapped here because facing the origin of the reaction threatens identity. Admitting that current behavior is driven by past power loss feels destabilizing. So they rationalize. They call it personality. They call it standards. They call it intuition. In truth, it is habit reinforced by fear. When awareness interrupts this cycle, behavior recalibrates. The body learns that it no longer needs to defend automatically. The mind updates its threat model. Over time, reactions slow, emotional spikes flatten, and presence sharpens. What emerges is not detachment, but command control that is rooted in the present, not haunted by what once happened. The past maintains influence through repetition, not relevance. Every time a memory is replayed, the brain treats it as rehearsal. Neural pathways strengthen through use, not truth. This is why a single moment can dominate years of behavior if it is revisited often enough. The mind does not ask whether the memory is useful. It only registers frequency and emotional charge. What is repeated becomes prioritized. Most people unknowingly train their own limitations. They replay conversations, mistakes, betrayals, and missed chances under the illusion of reflection. In reality, they are reinforcing the very patterns they claim to want to escape. The brain learns through exposure. When a memory is revisited with emotion, the nervous system prepares for it as if it will happen again. The body adapts posture, tone, and expectation around that possibility. This is how the past quietly scripts the future. This loop explains why time alone does not create distance. Years can pass, yet the internal response remains immediate and intense. The memory has been kept alive through repetition. Each replay sharpens its authority. Each emotional reaction tells the brain this information is still critical for survival. Without interruption, the mind continues to allocate energy toward guarding against something that no longer exists. Very few people recognize that thinking is an action. Rumination is not passive. It is active conditioning. The more detailed and emotional the replay, the more convincing the memory becomes. This is why some individuals appear frozen despite external progress. Their internal training never changed. They upgraded circumstances, but kept the same mental drills running. Strategic awareness begins when repetition is disrupted, not through suppression, but through refusal to engage. When a memory surfaces and is met with silence instead of analysis, its grip weakens. The brain expects emotional feedback. When it receives none, the signal loses priority. This is uncomfortable at first. The mind resists losing familiar reference points, even painful ones. Familiarity feels like control. The aware individual understands this resistance and does not negotiate with it. He allows the memory to pass without commentary. No justification, no replay, no emotional investment. This restraint retrains the nervous system. Over time, the brain stops elevating the memory because it no longer produces a response. Attention shifts forward naturally without force. Most people never reach this level because they mistake control for engagement. They believe they must understand, explain, or emotionally process everything. This keeps them tied to the loop. Control is not involvement. Control is selection. What receives attention grows. What is ignored fades. As repetition ends, behavior changes quietly. Decisions become cleaner. Emotional spikes lose intensity. The present moment gains clarity because it is no longer competing with rehearsed scenarios. The mind reallocates energy from defense to perception. This is when strategy becomes possible. Timing sharpens. Silence becomes comfortable. Reaction is replaced by choice. The past does not release its grip willingly. It fades only when it is starved of repetition. When the mind is trained to observe without replay, memory loses authority. What remains is not emptiness, but precision. The individual is no longer rehearsing survival. He is preparing for execution in the present, where real power has always existed. Most people remain emotionally bound to their past because they keep explaining it. Explanation feels intelligent. It feels like control. In reality, it is continued attachment disguised as insight. Every time an event is justified, defended, or emotionally narrated, the mind stays inside it. The story remains active. The identity formed in that moment stays relevant. This is how the past maintains leverage without resistance. Explanation keeps emotion alive. It requires tone, memory detail, and self-positioning. You are either the victim, the misunderstood one, or the survivor. Each role carries emotional charge. That charge signals importance to the brain. The more you explain, the more the nervous system believes the event still requires management. This is why people who talk the most about their past often feel the least free from it. Auditing is different. Auditing removes identity from the equation. It does not ask how something felt. It asks what changed. What decision was made? What pattern emerged? What leverage was gained or lost? There is no emotional narration, only structural assessment. This creates distance, and distance collapses emotional authority. Distance is where dominance forms. When an event can be examined without posture change, voice shift, or internal tension, it no longer owns you. You are not suppressing emotion. You are refusing to grant it command over attention. This distinction separates controlled individuals from emotionally intelligent ones. Emotional intelligence still engages. Control disengages strategically. Most people fear this shift because explanation feels like meaning. Letting go of explanation feels like erasing significance. In truth, it removes unnecessary weight. Not every event deserves lifelong relevance. Some experiences only mattered because you were unprepared at the time. Continuing to explain them keeps you aligned with an outdated version of yourself. Very few understand this detachment is not coldness. It is hierarchy. You are deciding what is above you and what is beneath you. When a memory no longer alters your decisions, it has been demoted. It becomes reference material, not instruction. This is when identity loosens its grip on outcomes that no longer apply. Unaware individuals confuse detachment with denial. Denial avoids reality. Detachment faces it without emotional submission. It is the ability to say, "This happened, and it no longer governs my behavior." That statement does not require emotion to be true. It requires authority. Auditing the past restructures the internal narrative. Instead of asking why something hurt, you ask why it mattered then and why it does not now. This reframing trains the brain to update relevance. Over time, memories lose emotional urgency. The nervous system relaxes its guard. Decision-making becomes cleaner because it is no longer distorted by legacy reactions. This process is quiet. There is no release moment, no emotional breakthrough. Power does not announce itself. It consolidates silently. The past fades not because it is forgiven, but because it is no longer consulted. When explanation ends, authority returns. What remains is clarity, timing, and the ability to move forward without dragging old outcomes into present decisions. The brain resists the future because uncertainty threatens its core function. It cannot predict outcomes it has not rehearsed. Familiar pain, no matter how damaging, offers predictability. Predictability feels like safety to the nervous system. This is why people return to the same environments, the same emotional roles, the same power dynamics, even when they consciously want change. The mind prefers known discomfort over unknown possibility. Most people believe they are stuck because they lack confidence or opportunity. In reality, they are loyal to what feels familiar. The brain anchors identity to repeated emotional states. If struggle, rejection, or instability were present during formative moments, those conditions become normalized. They feel like home. Breaking away from them creates internal resistance, not because the future is dangerous, but because it is undefined. This resistance manifests subtly: hesitation before action, overanalysis disguised as preparation, emotional numbness framed as patience, These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of a nervous system protecting continuity. The unaware individual interprets this as intuition or realism. The aware individual recognizes it as fear of losing the known self. Pain becomes comfortable when it is predictable. Even suffering can provide structure. It tells you who you are, what to expect, and how to behave. Letting go of that structure forces identity to recalibrate. That recalibration feels destabilizing. This is why many people sabotage progress at critical moments. Advancement threatens the internal order they have learned to survive within. Strength does not begin with movement. It begins with tolerance. The ability to sit inside uncertainty without immediately reaching for old behaviors is rare. Most people rush to relieve discomfort. They revert to habits that restore emotional familiarity. They speak when silence is required. They retreat when presence is required. They overassert when restraint would create leverage. The disciplined individual does the opposite. He allows the discomfort to exist without interpretation. He does not label it fear or intuition. He observes it as a physiological response that will pass if not fed. This restraint breaks the association between uncertainty and danger. Over time, the brain learns that unfamiliar conditions do not equal threat. This is how internal territory expands. Timing replaces impulse. Instead of reacting to emotional discomfort, the controlled individual waits. That wait creates asymmetry. Others reveal themselves through urgency while he gathers information. This is not passive. It is deliberate positioning. Power grows in the space between stimulus and response. Most people never develop this capacity because they mistake speed for strength. They believe action proves confidence. In reality, impulsive action often reveals insecurity. The need to resolve discomfort quickly exposes dependence on emotional relief. Those who can remain composed in uncertainty command the pace of interaction and outcome. As this tolerance increases, old patterns lose their pull. The familiar no longer feels safe, it feels limiting. The nervous system adapts to a higher baseline of ambiguity. Decision-making becomes sharper because it is no longer driven by the need to escape discomfort. Choices are made based on alignment, not relief. This shift is gradual and mostly invisible. There is no moment of transformation. There is only a growing ability to remain still where others panic, to delay where others rush, and to move when the moment is precise. This is the quiet evolution from survival to control. Familiar pain loses its grip when uncertainty is no longer feared, and the future stops being a threat and starts becoming terrain. Most people try to heal the past through emotion. They speak about it, write about it, analyze every detail, and seek validation for their pain. They believe that by expressing grief, anger, or regret, they are freeing themselves. In reality, this approach prolongs the attachment. Every emotional expression reconnects the brain to the original experience. It strengthens the neural pathways that continue to control behavior. The more attention and emotion applied to past events, the more authority they retain over present decisions. The very act of processing emotionally can unintentionally reinforce the memory's dominance. Elite control does not come from catharsis or verbal release. It comes from neutralization. Neutralization is the quiet act of withdrawing the memory's authority. It does not erase the past, nor does it deny its impact. It simply removes its ability to manipulate posture, tone, decisions, or attention. Whereas emotional processing keeps the mind tethered to old events, strategic neutralization disengages the past from the present. This is subtle, invisible power. Few recognize that real mastery over memory is not measured in forgiveness or expression, but in the absence of its influence on behavior. The brain thrives on feedback loops. When a memory triggers a response, each reaction reinforces the pathway, signaling its continued importance. The unaware continue to feed this loop with explanation, justification, or regret. In contrast, neutralization interrupts the cycle. The moment the mind refuses to react, the neural reinforcement weakens. The memory still exists, but it ceases to dictate terms. Emotional silence becomes a tool of authority. The aware individual learns to witness without participation, to observe without engagement, and to allow past events to exist as inert information, not active agents. This is not suppression. Suppression is temporary avoidance that eventually resurfaces with greater intensity. Neutralization is permanent recalibration. The mind recalibrates by reassigning priority. Attention is redirected to the present, and the past loses urgency. Calm replaces reflex. Timing replaces reaction. The nervous system gradually ceases to respond as though the event were current. Over time, decision-making is freed from legacy interference, and strategic clarity replaces habitual response. Most people fail at this because they confuse awareness with engagement. They believe that confronting the past emotionally proves understanding or strength. Awareness, however, is passive in presence, but active in control. It observes the impulse to react, acknowledges its origin, and deliberately chooses inaction. This restraint retrains the brain. Neural pathways that once commanded anxiety, fear, or shame are weakened through non-participation. The individual stops reliving history and begins operating from the present. Silence and observation are deceptively powerful. They are quiet acts that gradually shift dominance from past events to conscious will. The aware individual does not need to justify or narrate his journey. His behavior alone signals mastery. There is no spectacle, no emotional display. Every choice is measured, every movement deliberate, every reaction contained. The past loses its capacity to surprise, provoke, or control because it is no longer being fed energy. Ultimately, the moment of mastery arrives not as a sudden epiphany, but as sustained practice. Repeated observation without engagement rewires the brain's approach to memory. Over time, old pain, regret, and humiliation cease to influence posture, tone, or decision-making. Presence becomes complete. The individual moves through life with precision and calm, unaffected by the histories that ensnare others. Emotional neutrality becomes the signature of authority, because power is not in expression but in the absence of manipulation. The past is still present, but it no longer holds dominion. Its authority has been stripped not through denial, not through struggle, but through strategic detachment. The mind is free not because the events are forgotten, but because they have been rendered powerless over action, perception, and choice. Mastery is quiet, invisible, and absolute. The final shift occurs when you realize the simplest truth about memory. It only survives through your attention. Attention is the currency of influence. Without it, even the most vivid experiences fade into irrelevance. The brain continuously seeks patterns and connections, and when you grant repeated focus to past events, you reinforce their power. Every glance backward, every mental rehearsal, every emotional reaction signals to the nervous system that these moments are still active, still threatening, still relevant. The past only holds sway because you keep validating its authority. Awareness is not about erasing what occurred, it is about denying it the ability to dictate your present. Most people fail to see this, believing that memories are immutable. They treat the past as an external force, something that happens to them, rather than a system that is fed by their own engagement. Every thought, every emotional spike, every narrative they replay is a contribution to its survival. The past thrives on attention. It grows stronger with each reaction. Those who live in replay mode are effectively giving the past a voice louder than their own reasoning. Their behavior is governed less by present reality than by historical scripts written under conditions that no longer exist. Powerlessness often masquerades as reflection. It is in truth habitual submission to what has already concluded. The aware individual understands this dynamic and chooses differently. He no longer grants attention without intention. When a memory surfaces, he notices it, acknowledges its presence, and then withdraws engagement. Silence becomes a tool of mastery. Observation replaces reaction. There is no need for explanation, for justification, or for emotional processing. Each withheld response diminishes the authority of the memory. The nervous system recalibrates. Neural pathways previously reinforced by repetition weaken because the loop has been interrupted. What once triggered urgency now passes without influence. This is the quiet method through which dominance returns not by confrontation, not by force, but by deliberate inattention. Control emerges through consistency. One instance of attention withdrawal might have little impact, but repeated practice transforms the brain's architecture. Over time, the individual experiences a subtle but profound liberation. The past loses the ability to influence posture, tone, decisions, or perception. This is why those who have mastered attention are difficult to provoke, hard to predict, and resistant to manipulation. Their reactions are not absent, they are deliberate. Emotional spikes, conditioned by prior experiences, no longer dictate behavior. Timing and precision replace urgency and impulse. What remains is a mind that navigates the present from a position of authority, unburdened by history. The shift also changes perception of others. Once the internal loop of past events is interrupted, one gains clarity in recognizing patterns outside the self. The unaware continue to operate under their old rules, often projecting unresolved histories onto relationships, situations, and challenges. The aware individual observes without projection, acting strategically rather than reflexively. Interactions become exercises of influence rather than responses to threat or discomfort. Presence alone becomes a signal of command because the individual is no longer entangled in reactive habits. He has chosen where his energy flows, and this selection dictates the flow of outcomes around him. Few understand that freedom from the past is not liberation in the conventional sense. It is not emotional resolution, catharsis, or forgiveness. It is the permanent denial of authority to what is no longer relevant. The mind is no longer coerced by memory because it no longer participates in the cycles that give memory strength. Silence, observation, and deliberate inattention create an internal hierarchy where choice reigns and history is merely reference. The past exists, but it is inert, stripped of its ability to command or manipulate. True mastery manifests quietly. The individual moves with a calm precision that is impervious to external disturbance. Emotional neutrality becomes the signature of authority. He operates from a present defined by intention, not reaction. Timing is exact because attention is finite and controlled. Strategic clarity replaces impulsive repetition. Every decision, posture, and reaction is measured. The past may attempt to intrude, but without attention, it is powerless. The moment you stop granting the past permission to govern, your brain begins to align with your will, not your history. Authority is restored not through conquest of others, but through reclamation of self, and the individual becomes a force shaped not by what was, but by what is chosen now. If this sharpened your awareness, like the video and subscribe, because the past does not disappear, it waits for permission. And silence is where you decide whether it gets it.